Most people's Homelab uptime commitment is, I'll get to it eventually. I know mine is. But I had a few conversations with a gentleman over the last couple of conferences who really changed my mind about the idea of having a Homelab SLA. Matthias Palmersheim runs his Homelab on an SLA that his wife has actually signed off on. And so today we're going to find out exactly what that means. Hey there, and welcome to the IT Guy Show. I'm your host, Eric the IT Guy Hendricks. This is episode number 25. We're continuing a unofficial story arc, if you will, around my Homelab and the rebuild. In fact, at the time of recording, I'm working on a migration from standard RPM-based transactional servers, ranging from Fedora, CentOS, RHEL, Alma Linux, Rocky Linux, to standardizing on bootc images running Fedora server. So these conversations could not be better timed. I'm really excited that so many of my nerdy friends are coming on to talk about Homelabs, to talk about their journeys, because let's face it, this is as much for me as it is for all of you. With that said, I'm going to bring on my guest today. Matthias, welcome to the IT Guy Show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so Matthias and I met briefly at Linux Fest Northwest earlier this year, and then we're set up at our respective booths, literally across the hall from each other at Southeast Linux Fest. And the one conversation that kept coming up over and over again was our Homelab, some of the services that we're running. In fact, Matthias has convinced me that at some point I need to rebuild my Matrix server. We may touch on that a bit later, but Matthias has really encouraged me to spend some real time rebuilding my Homelab. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So Matthias, why don't you take a moment, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then something that you do for fun.
Yeah, I'm Mathias Palmersheim. My day job is I'm a solutions engineer at VictoriaMetrics. And outside of that, I'm also the maintainer of an open source observability project called ShiftMon. And when I'm not staring at a computer screen, I like spending time with my family, and I train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
And Shelby takes lessons as well, right?
It's a marital counseling, yeah.
There you go. I love it. So yeah, we got talking, and we have a lot in common. In fact, hopefully in that blurb eventually will be tabletop role-playing games.
Yes, that is something I've enjoyed at a couple of Linux conferences and have not made a personal commitment to do it outside of that, and I need to fix that.
So if you missed it, my previous episode was actually just the recording from Southeast Linux Fest, where Matthias and probably about 15 or so other people joined me for an introduction to tabletop role-playing games. We talked about some of the different varieties, how the games are structured, and then we ultimately tried in basically in a large-scale room, tried to do a little bit of role-playing live. So if you haven't caught episode 24, definitely give that one a listen. The YouTube video may be a little bit better, but it was a lot of fun, and it was a new talk format I hadn't done.
And can either of us still pronounce Automata correctly?
No.
Okay.
If you're curious, go check out episode 24. It was a great time, and definitely want to give that talk again. So you and I first met because of your employer, VictoriaMetrics. Why don't we start there? What is VictoriaMetrics, and what problem does it try and solve?
Yeah, so VictoriaMetrics works on open source projects around open source observability. So you're able to store data on anything from my tiny little Homelab all the way up to massive distributed deployments that span across multiple regions, all using the same workflows and same utilities. So a lot of people find us because they get frustrated that something else doesn't scale or have a certain feature they want, and then they'll usually adopt one of the VictoriaMetrics solutions. So we started off with metrics, but now we also do logs, tracing, and anomaly detection as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's an amazing product, and it's really beautiful as well. Not all not all observability tools are as intuitive as VictoriaMetrics. In fact, that's probably on my list of tools that I need to install here in my home lab.
Yeah. And on Proxmox, I think there's actually helper scripts for that too. So
nice.
I'm partial to a certain way of installing VictoriaMetrics we'll get to in a second. But there's the helper scripts, there's containers, everything besides anomaly detection is written in Go. So it's kind of like any way you can spin up a Go binary.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's great. So one of the big calls for VictoriaMetrics is time series data and high cardinality. Can you explain what those two terms are and why it's such a pain for other tools to manage?
Yeah. So time series data is any data that can be measured over time. And the way it's structured inside of VictoriaMetrics and most time series databases is there's a timestamp and a value, and then a certain number of key value pairs, including like a metric name, that make up labels. And the total number of those things you have to store are cardinality. So an example would be something like a home sensor. So like the state of your garage being open or closed. So that would be that could be represented as a value of 0 and a value 1. And then over time, how often the garage door is closed or open, you'll get a different sample every so often. And then the number, you could have different labels, like the you can have different labels. So you would have the name, which would be like garage door status would be the name. And then you would have the state, which would be another label that would have a value of open. And that could also have a value of closed. So the cardinality of the garage door metric would be 2, because it could be either in an open state or a closed state. And that value fluctuates over time.
And that's just a binary. That's just a 0 or a 1. But thinking about something more complicated like temperature sensors, or scaling out to the enterprise, something like response times for servers or even applications.
Yep. So that would be a good so there's a few different types of metrics. The one I gave would be a gauge, because it can go up or down. It's not counting anywhere. And that covers anything that can just fluctuate arbitrarily. So something like the CPU utilization on a server, the response time of an application from a black box probe, those would be covered under gauges. And then you also have something called a counter, which is like the number of requests an application has accepted over time. And that number either just goes up or restarts to 0. And the other one that's fairly common is a histogram, which is basically a way of putting data into buckets. And then you can answer questions like, how fast are 99% of the questions, or the number of requests answered in an application are. So that's where you hear terms like P99 it's just a fancy nerdy way of saying how fast are 99% of requests answered.
So people in the audience are probably going, well, wait, does Mathias really pay for an enterprise product to run in his home lab? But luckily, VictoriaMetrics, like so many other amazing open source friendly companies, actually has multiple different tiers. You want to kind of talk us through what those are?
Yeah. So VictoriaMetrics works off of an open core business model. So inside of the open source version, you can run a single version, or you can run the cluster version of all of our products. There's just certain features that are behind a paywall. So inside of metrics, that would be things like downsampling. So for daily troubleshooting, it's important that you have high resolution of data. So like I need to know within like a 10-second sample interval what things are happening in a day-to-day. But that gets really expensive to store over time, especially when you think about massive enterprises that have hundreds of millions or billions of active time series. Tracking that over an extended period of time at full resolution gets expensive. And downsampling is kind of a way of breaking that into windows and then poking holes in it so you can save on hard drive space. But in like a small home lab, or even like a smaller medium business, a lot of the enterprise features aren't like critical to things functioning. So you could happily use the open source version in those scenarios. And the biggest thing that the enterprise version of VictoriaMetrics has is support. Like, yes, downsampling can save you a ton of hard drive space, but just simply like working with clients, we've saved them half of their hardware without even touching the enterprise version of the product.
Yeah, that's really great to hear, and really encourages me, especially as I want to start switching my apartment over to smart home assistant friendly devices as much as I can in an apartment. It'd be nice to have a nice centralized location to bring a lot of that data into.
And you wanted to do that with Home Assistant, right?
That's what I'm thinking right now, but I'm always open to having my mind changed.
Home Assistant's actually my favorite Prometheus exporter, along with an automation hub. Um, Home Assistant has a really nice Prometheus integration where it's exposed by the API. So you just need to tell VictoriaMetrics or whatever collector you're using to scrape Prometheus endpoints to grab that. And you can store it in VictoriaMetrics, Prometheus, whatever tickles your fancy.
Oh, that's awesome. So one other aspect of Victoria that I wanted to talk about was Victoria logs. How does that fit into this picture? And is that something you're using at home as well?
Yes. So Victoria Logs is a database that's designed strictly for storing logs. And the nice thing about it is that it's really easy to go from I want to store logs to storing like tens or hundreds of terabytes of logs. You can deploy it as a single binary, and that same binary can be told to work as a component of a cluster or just work by itself. And it's also extremely flexible about how you get data in. So something that sets VictoriaMetrics and Victoria Logs apart is it is aggressively not picky about how you get data in. So if you have a bunch of crusty old network switches sitting around somewhere that only support syslog, we support that. Or if you're very with it and into open telemetry, we support that as well. And a few things in between, like the Loki ingestion protocol or the Elastic ingestion protocol as well.
So this kind of feels like a nice all-in-one replacement for OpenNMS or Nagios. I've run both of those in my Homelab over the years. I forget what the log collection software I used to run was, but it feels like VictoriaMetrics might be a nice solid replacement for all of that.
Yeah, so all those components you could stand up individually by yourself, but there is a way that you could use Ansible to kind of stand everything up in an all-in-one package. And that's where my hobby project comes in. If I'm getting too aggressive on that, please let me know.
No, that actually is a perfect call out, because I wanted to talk about your open source project. So you're a major part of ShiftMon, am I right?
Yep. I am the creator of the project and the most active maintainer right now. And go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask which one came first, ShiftMon or VictoriaMetrics?
ShiftMon came first. There was a couple of different iterations that used other products that I don't want to speak ill of on stream, so we'll not talk about those prior iterations.
Always appreciated.
But basically, I wanted to have something that could keep receiving data via telegraph, because that's what I was using to collect telemetry before. And I wanted to speak Prometheus because that had a really nice, rich query language that had a bunch of pre-existing integrations and content I can kind of piggyback off of. And that's where I found VictoriaMetrics. So the first iteration of ShiftMon came out in like 2020 or 2021, and VictoriaMetrics was founded in 2018.
And so now your passion project and your day job kind of align.
Yeah. So after I had started using VictoriaMetrics for ShiftMon as the metric store, I started following the VictoriaMetrics project closely and was watching their quarterly updates one day, and they're like, we're hiring solutions engineers in North America. I was like, I like don't shut up about how much I like VictoriaMetrics and I don't get paid. It'd be kind of nice if I could turn this into a day job.
There you go.
And so I sent an email out to one of the co-founders, and I went through the interview process, and the rest is history.
Nice. That's awesome. So tell me a little bit more about ShiftMon and what your objective is there.
Yeah. So it started off as a way of getting notified if an automation job failed. So I use Ansible to configure all of my Homelab, but when I started adopting infrastructure as code and using Ansible for everything, I had like my old gaming rig that could not support running Ansible AWX or Tower. It was kind of a potato. And so I decided to run Ansible pull instead of Ansible. So when I provision like when I install Fedora on a new desktop, I just install Ansible and I use Ansible pull, which can consume Ansible content from a Git repo. And then when I run the desktop role, it'll actually create a systemd unit to run that periodically at night. So if I make a change and check it into Git, it'll show up on my machines the next morning. And
Nice.
I didn't have a way to check that was failing because unlike like using AWX or Semaphore UI or one of the other wrappers for Ansible, you don't get like reports or statuses of when jobs failed. And so I just kept on chewing through open source observability solutions, trying to find a way to get notified when one of those Ansible jobs failed. And once I started solving that problem for myself, I noticed every job I had observability that was terrible, in my opinion. And so I started morphing, like formalizing and morphing ShiftMon into something I could take to work. So like it's an Apache 2 license project, so it's super easy to just like sneak it onto a virtual machine and roll it out.
That's awesome. So that I mean, this is kind of the way our conversation went at Southeast Linux Fest, and so that ultimately led us to how you run your home lab. So the audience here knows that I've got a single node Proxmox system. I just mentioned how I'm moving everything from. I've held multiple jobs over the last 18 months, so I'm currently you can tell which generation of my home lab based on which Linux distribution. So I'm currently on another monitor. I have all of my projects trying to get Forjo up and running and get some runners going so that I can rebuild my infrastructure nightly on I'm using Fedora server bootsy. Ask me again in a couple of months if I regret that decision and if I've moved to something a little bit more downstream. But so I mean that's and my hope is to be able to reproduce builds, to use bootsy where I can, use Ansible where I can't, and really make a much more hands-off infrastructure. So it was one of those conversations that we had where you really started giving me a rundown of what your home lab looks like. Can you give our audience a little bit of a virtual tour, as it were?
So yeah, everything gets stored inside of a Forgio server, and then I manage everything inside of that Git repo. And inside of that Git repo there's a bunch of Ansible roles, and most of them, what they are is spinning up most of them assume that there's a Fedora machine somewhere that they're pointed at. And on that Fedora machine, I wrote my own Ansible rule that will provision Docker on that machine and then spit a compose file in there and spin it up. And there's even like ways of adding in certain configuration files. So if you have an application like Blocky DNS or AdGuard Home that's configured through a YAML file, there's a way to store that in Git and then tell the Docker role to say, hey, you need to create these folders and then put a file in this folder. And then at the end, it runs Docker Compose up for you and it's in there. And I can either deploy the Ansible playbooks through a tool called Semaphore UI, which is like AWX's baby brother that also does Terraform and Bash scripts as well. So if I want a pretty GUI to click through things, I can. I also just started using a program called Just, which is like the Rust rewrite of make, which will let me just say like just and then put a limit flag in and then Docker, and it will provision the Docker host role on that node.
Oh gosh. And what kind of hardware and software are you running?
So right now I have a mini PC and then 2 custom built desktops I threw in Rosewell cases. It used to make a lot of sense to just like buy used enterprise gear, but newer enterprise gear isn't hitting the secondhand market nearly as quickly as it used to, and power bills have gotten more expensive.
Yep.
So I'm basically just building desktops inside of server hardware or using a mini PC. I'd recommend the mini PC route unless you have like a large collection of Linux ISOs or like a large photo gallery you're trying to store, because mini PCs are really efficient at compute, but they have like 1 or 2 NVMe drives, and that can get rather expensive to store.
One of the upcoming episodes of this show is actually going to be an interview with 45 Homelabs. So they might be able to sell you a nice high efficiency, low cost SAN. That's kind of my hope, especially since I'm apartment bound for the foreseeable future. My thought is to replace my co-located PowerEdge R730, R720. It's an R720. My hope is to replace that R720 with a couple of mini PCs or some kind of a NUC style system, and then have some kind of a SAN that also could run Plex. That way I could, that greatly reduces the amount of hardware requirement that I need. And if I could bring that into my apartment where I've got a 3 gig symmetrical connection versus a 1 gig out of the colo, my home lab would be so much nicer. Not to mention inside the apartment, I have 10 gigs just about everywhere.
Yeah. And do you have a lot of latency having your home lab in a colo, or do you feel that ever?
I don't feel it from my perspective, because the colo is about 10 miles from here, maybe. So there's not much latency. Now, if you were to visit my website, or maybe jump on my Foundry VTT server or something from one of the coasts, you might see a little bit more latency. But so far for what I do, I really haven't noticed anything.
Well, that just means you need to set up black box monitoring before, and then you could set it up after to see what the actual latency shift is.
There you go. Yeah. A lot of my home lab right now is built off of Feel. So, and it's just me using it, other than my daughter utilizes my Minecraft and Plex servers quite a bit. But other than that, it's really just me using it at this point in time.
So you have man's first monitoring system, angry users.
Yeah, that's been my monitoring system for about the last 8 years.
I still have that one as a fallback.
Right. And that's actually kind of what got us started on this whole conversation. Was you and your wife actually have like change management and SLAs in place. Kind of tell me about how that came about.
I was really struggling to write my wedding vows. And so the first thing that was in my wedding vows was a 99.9% uptime SLA. Because early on in my relationship, I was not as mature in my change management process. And because I was like living by myself and really wasn't hurting anyone when I was breaking the internet, I was tearing stuff down and spinning it up all the time with pretty much reckless abandon. And when I had moved in with my wife and my 2 stepkids, that kind of started to become a problem. And so having a stable lab and having a stable home lab definitely made everyone happier when I started to have a mature change management process.
And you two have taken this so far that you actually hold meetings, right?
They're very informal. It's just mostly joking. So like a source of humor in my life is either explaining like work things in terms of like dating relationships, or vice versa, where I'm explaining like just telling my wife, hey, I'm adding a DNS record, something might go wrong with that. And that's a change management meeting.
There you go. Yeah, I've been present for a couple of these conversations, and it's hilarious. Like, I have to ask, have you moved back to Tailscale?
I have. So the change I burned my error budget, if you're not familiar with what those are, to say I had a very unstable overlaid network solution that was fully self-hostable, which is the one gripe I have with Tailscale. Is you can self-host Headscale, but it's not like the blessed official version. It's kind of like we're cool with it. It's it's like Apple. It's as official as unofficial can be. It's kind of how my mind compares it. So I was hoping to see if there was something that was entirely self-hosted that I could deploy, and it kind of worked. But kind of work does not lead to a happy change management committee.
This is true. Yeah, Saturday itself was really, really slow in vendor row. So I was literally sitting there on my laptop with a host-to-host connection from my laptop via Tailscale into my home lab. I've got a Bastion host there that runs Fedora Linux 44, and literally set up a subnet, a Tailscale subnet from the hotel conference center at Self, so that I could finally, if I was on the road, I could finally access my Homelab as if I was on the same subnet. So now it really cut down on the number of DNS records and ports I had to have open in my OpenSense firewall, and it really made life easier because anything that was truly internal, just flick on Tailscale on my laptop and I'm there. But otherwise, I could turn that off. If I'm not on my home network, there's a firewall rule that allows just full access from my home IP, which is great until Google changes my home IP address, which has happened twice in the last 7 months. So it always makes life interesting. But my efforts to set up Tailscale from Southeast Linux Fest initiated that change back to Tailscale. I watched the pros and cons be weighed out right there in front of me. It was great to watch a married couple work through change management like that.
Yeah. The change management committee is much happier now that the networking is stable again. The other nice thing is Tailscale actually has a Prometheus exporter too, and ShiftMon will pick it up automatically as well.
Nice. So what sorts of applications are you currently running in your Homelab? Is it all just infrastructure work stuff, or is there a lot of hobbyist type workloads as well?
There's a bunch of hobbyist stuff as well. So for me, it's my primary. For my wife, it's the secondary photo archive is Image for hosting images. We also, I like doing DNS filtering because doing full SSL inspection is just a nightmare to do. I've had to attempt working in those environments at an MSP, and DNS filtering is like a quick and cheap way to get most of the way there and to not see as many ads. I also have a 4Geo instance and some before UI, but that's mostly like just keeping the lights on stuff. I also have Jellyfin spun up and a PowerWorld server because PowerWorld 1.0 came out last Thursday or last Friday. And I'm excited to get to spend every waking moment outside of work playing it.
Yeah, there was actually a discussion out on Matrix about whether or not PowerWorld was worth playing after the whole Nintendo debacle. So ever since that conversation, I have downloaded it on my laptop, but this is the most engaged I've been with my Homelab in a couple of years. So I've been very, very much addicted to this migration from RPM-based, well, not RPM, but transaction-based server operating systems over to Bootsy. I have not been this engaged with a project in a very long time.
SRE Simulator is a very addicting game.
See, that's one I'm not familiar with. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about it?
It's the slang game for Homelab. So whenever my wife will go play video games, or possibly my kids will too, and sometimes I'll just hang out with them in Discord and say, yeah, I'm just going to play SRE Simulator, which just means I'm working in my Homelab.
There you go. Yeah, I was like, is this a real game? And I went searching for it, and I was like, Mathias, I can't find this anywhere.
No, it's I think it's coming up on the most hours I've ever put in a video game. It's like a toss-up between that and old Pokemon games I've been playing since I was 7.
There you go. So what got you started on Homelabs in the first place? Was it you wanted things at home, or was it what you wanted you wanted a place to play with things at work? How did that process come across?
It started off as personal curiosity. I originally wanted to do it for networking purposes. So I wanted to learn more about networking and setting up like an enterprise grade router like pfSense in my house. I eventually got to start off there, but my job needed enterprise grade networking sooner. So I actually got to learn that first. And then it's slowly become more practical over time, where now it's like a way to serve my family and less so about learning. There's still a decent amount of learning goes on, but now it's about like solving real problems rather than trying to impersonate as big of a company as possible in my basement.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth between just desktops and enterprise grade hardware. I've gone back and forth between running, like I used to work for Red Hat, so I ran RHEL in my Homelab. Now it's evolved a little bit. I'm still very much involved in the enterprise Linux space, which is one of the reasons why I looked at running Fedora server on Bootsy. But also because I also host the Fedora podcast, which, hey, free PSA. We just published an episode last week about the Fedora contributor recognition program, and we've got another episode coming up here in a week or so. So if you haven't been following the Fedora podcast, be sure to give that a look. See what I did there? I snuck an ad right in. But and people didn't even know it. But yeah, it's a lot of how can I make my life easier. There's still a lot of learning involved, like this whole bootsy process. I've finally kind of figured out why people are loving it so much. But at the same time, beating my head against the keyboard, going, why? Let me just install Fedora server, get some Ansible playbooks, and call it a day. But being able to run things like Plex, like a Minecraft server that as my daughter's getting older, she and I we might blow up the world files and deploy a new one, and she and I play that together. But just having things and like I'm a huge tabletop role playing game nerd, so I've got Foundry VTT that I host here in my home lab. I could pay a service $5 or $10 a month to host it for me. But why bother when I've got a home lab of my own? It just gives me another reason to keep those skills sharp.
So how has the Bootsy migration been? That's been something that's on my to-do list, but because my home lab's being more practical now, it's been something that's like, I'm still scarred from trying Nix a couple of years ago. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I cannot get myself to move to Nix. I spend too much time in the enterprise Linux space, so Bootsy seemed to be the way to go. And I love the concept. For those that aren't familiar, Bootsy is basically taking everything that we've known for years works great on mobile devices and applies it to the server or workstation space. So you define an image in what amounts to basically a Docker file, and then you build that image on your system. And then you can deploy that remotely. And what's great is you can download it during the day and you can have your system reboot onto the new image at night. It works just like a cell phone. You're running, iOS or Android X.Y, and then you make a change in your infrastructure platform, and then you go to those clients and go, oh, look, I have Z.A available now, and just do a Bootsy upgrade, you reboot your system, you're running the new version. So for those that don't know what Bootsy is, there's the quick and dirty, which, by the way, there was a Fedora podcast episode just a couple of months ago about Bootsy. But to answer your question, I started out a little too big in the scope of my project. I wanted to run Bootsy out of the box on everything. And so I was trying to even get Bootsy configured to run Forjo, and then the Forjo runners. And so I spent 3 or 4 days trying to get all that to work. But the problem, and I'm sure you can relate to this, the problem with that is you've got this chicken or the egg problem of you need the tool that you're going to use to build all of your tools. But if you want to use those tools to build the original tool, then you're kind of stuck. And it's like, well, I want to self-host all of this stuff and then use GitHub as a backup host. I'll pause there because you're getting ready to chime in.
Yeah, I was going to say, we kind of talked about that with monitoring too, where you have that first mover problem of just like, who's monitoring who, or like, do you need infrastructure to stand up your infrastructure kind of thing?
And that's where I'm at, is I need infrastructure to stand up my infrastructure. So I'm at a place right now, and by the time this is recorded, I've probably solved this. Or by the time this airs, I'll probably have solved this problem. But I've gotten to a point where I have a base, what I've called a golden image, ready to go. That's got Fedora server. It's got a couple of the key user accounts, SSH keys, extra packages that I want on every server. I've got that pretty well figured out. And so now I've just basically taken that template and I stood up Forjo, which is what the Fedora project and others use as a replacement for, say, GitLab or using third-party GitHub. So basically, I've got my own Git instance up and running. I've got the runners, which are actually going to do the job. I've got those spun up. At the time of recording, they aren't registering back to the Forjo server, so I'm trying to figure out why the runners aren't registering. So the goal is just, can I get my existing infrastructure ported over to Bootsy? Then I'll take a step back and I'll deal with the problem of I need infrastructure to stand up my infrastructure, which at this point is probably a Linode box running just Forjo and a Forjo runner. that all it does is watches my home lab. If my home IP drops, maybe it spins up a couple of key services. Like I'm using Hugo now instead of WordPress to create static HTML for my website. I don't ever want my website down, so this Forjo server would know that if my home IP goes down, that I need to go in and spin up a static HTML website, because I don't ever want that down. People connect with me for meetings, for open source collaboration, right now for job hunting and job networking. I don't ever want that website down. So eventually I'm going to go back and solve that problem. It'll serve as a backup. It'll serve as a DR. It'll serve as kind of that it's kind of that infrastructure, building your infrastructure solution.
Yeah. Other times too, I'm just like, I hope if my server rack bursts into flames or whatever, I have a new enough copy of Git. So you're being much more mature than me in that regard, or a new enough version of the repo pulled that I can quick start.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of my development on my Bastion host, but then I try and do it from my local laptop and go, why isn't this working? I fixed this problem. Oh, right.
Git pull.
Yeah,
I've done that to myself a ton. My Git hygiene is atrocious.
I'm trying to be better about that, but it's been an interesting experience. I ran into issues where just setting the host name hasn't actually set the host name. One iteration, the DNS would pull the host name, but locally didn't recognize its own name. And then I made some changes, and then locally would recognize the host name, but wouldn't register remotely. So like DNS wasn't working, Tailscale wasn't working, and it's just weird issues. And I was like, no, screw it. I'm just going to go back to regular old RPM-based Fedora server. It's like, no, this is what everyone's using nowadays. This is what enterprises need to be moving towards. So I need to put in that time and effort to figure this out.
It's like in Batman, it's harder to migrate to something new when you have that rope. So you just need to like cut the rope and pretend like your stable existing set of Ansible playbooks don't exist.
Well, and my Ansible playbooks are so old and out of date and don't apply to anything that I have right now. So it makes it easy that it's like, you know what, if I'm going to rebuild this, I'm going to rebuild it right. And I'm going to have runners. I'm going to have automated jobs. I'm not going to log in once a week and run DNF update on these systems. They're going to rebuild themselves every night. In fact, I made a design decision the other day that I'm actually going to have 2 runner servers. That way I can set them up to rebuild each other. So, runner 01 will rebuild itself at 2 in the morning, and then at 3 in the morning have runner 02 check and make sure that runner 01 is up before having runner 01 rebuild 02, and that way they can kind of take care of each other.
It's the same reason I have 2 ShiftMon servers. It's the Spider-Man meme architecture, where you have 2 instances of the same app pointed at each other so they can keep each other honest.
Right. Yeah, it's a crazy ordeal. But so I know you've got a bit of a schedule crunch. So I always wrap up an episode with the same question. Is there something that you would tell someone who's just getting involved in the industry, or someone who wants to set up their own home lab? Is there something that you would recommend for newcomers?
2 things. One, pick something you care about as a service. You'll be way more motivated to do it. And 2, expect you're going to suck at it the first time. A lot of people will like get inside their own head, and they'll watch like people like me that have stayed up way too late most nights, like trying something and getting better at it over like a decade. And they'll compare themselves to that instead of realizing like you're new at this, you're going to suck. So pick something you care about and expect you're going to suck, and you'll be much happier.
That is fantastic advice. And it's actually a conversation I've had to have with myself with this Bootsy project. It's like, how long have I been a sysadmin? What, 15 years? I should have this figured out. No, this is a different mechanism. This is a different system. And I've really appreciated all that I have learned about Bootsy and just in the last couple of weeks, ever since making the decision to make the switch. So fantastic advice. Is there anywhere you'd like to send folks? Let them follow you, follow ShiftMon?
Yeah. So everything I do on the internet is on links.shiftsystems.net. Hopefully we can put that in like the podcast description. Definitely. And then shiftsystems.net is the homepage for Shift Systems, and I'll have linked to like the GitLab project and everything.
Awesome. Yeah, well, Mathias, thank you so much for being my guest. I really appreciate the chance to kind of chat and swap horror stories. But we'll definitely have to have you back on the IT Guy show here in the future.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. And if this is your first time, make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. That way you get notified anytime I publish new content. Publish this show about every other week. And in an ideal world, the Fedora podcast publish on the off weeks of this show. So head over to fedoraproject.org to get all the information about the Fedora podcast. I've got about 3 or 4 different interview requests out, and they're at different stages of scheduling. So I'm not sure what the next episode of this show will be, but so be sure to tune in for that. But also one last request, if you do listen to the audio podcast, please do me a huge favor. I am working hard on growing the audience here. So if you have been a long-time listener, go to your audio podcast player of choice, whether that's Apple or Android or anywhere of a dozen other places this show is published, and just give a 5-star rating and leave a review. I'd really appreciate it. That really does help grease the algorithm and help recommend the show to new people. I'd really like to make this into a community, not just something that I talk into a mic and scream in the void every so often. So but anyway, really appreciate you all tuning in, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks. So on behalf of Mathias, my guest, I've been Eric the IT Guy Hendricks, and we'll talk to you again real soon.